After enduring a grueling training course, Rick, our protagonist, was sprawled on the ground, his strength almost completely gone, half believing he was on the verge of death. From the shadows, a figure emerged, looking at Rick with a satisfied gaze, praising his perseverance and assuring him that the dreaded E-rank exam would now be a piece of cake. Rick acknowledged the praise, but couldn't shake the feeling that he still had a long way to go. The next day, at the guild hall, as Rick registered for the E-rank promotion exam, the receptionist recognized him and called his name in a friendly manner. She introduced herself as Arisa, and they were both delighted by the reunion. Rick was surprised to learn that Arisa had transferred to the Central Guild Hall, and that she had found out he'd quit his office job to pursue the path of an adventurer. Amidst the sea of young faces in the testing area, Rick's heart sank as he remembered his age. 32, far past the ideal age to start the life of an adventurer. His thoughts were interrupted when a middle-aged man started harassing Arisa, trying to ask her out on a date. Although she politely refused, the man persisted and became aggressive. Rick intervened, de-escalating the situation. But the guy suddenly lunged forward to throw a punch. Noticing how slow he was, Rick easily dodged the attack and threw a counterpunch, knocking the man out instantly. Arisa, grateful, handed Rick his exam ticket with the number 4242, a number Rick found somewhat strange. Leaving the guild hall, Rick unexpectedly ran into Lynette, a beautiful dark elf who asked about his registration. Overjoyed, Rick welcomed the unexpected encounter. He couldn't help but secretly admire Lynette's beauty, and with a slightly nostalgic smile, he joked to himself that he wished he were 10 years younger, especially when remembering Lynette's two prominent features. She reminded Rick to hurry to the exam site, also informing him that his master would be there to observe his performance. This news made Rick a little anxious, as he feared his master's presence might cause trouble. Arriving at the exam area, Rick observed the young candidates with their powerful potential, and his confidence began to waver. They seemed ready to become anything they wanted to be. However, Lynette praised Rick's remarkable progress after 2 years of harsh training, suggesting that the other candidates would doubt their own abilities after witnessing his strength. She also advised him to hold back a little to avoid discouraging them too much. Rick was well aware of his own strength and growth, but he also realized how lonely he'd been during his harsh training years. First on the mountain, then within the walls of the guild hall, he had never had the chance to test himself against ordinary adventurers to understand his own capabilities. Lynette explained the ranking system from F to S, leading Rick to humbly estimate that he could at least achieve E rank. With Lynette's encouragement, she reminded him that he was a member of the Orichalcum Fist, a title that should bolster his confidence. Meanwhile, back at the guild hall, Arisa directed the guards to remove the middle-aged man Rick had dealt with earlier. Upon inspection, the guards noticed a perfect, fist-shaped dent in the man's armor, and it turned out the guy was an A-rank adventurer. This discovery led everyone to speculate on the intensity of the training Rick must have gone through. For the E-rank promotion exam, Rick had to face 2 tests. The first was to measure his attack power by punching a special slime punching bag. The instructor encouraged the candidates to put all their strength into the punch. Flashing back to his training, Rick remembered his master's teaching that he must train his body enough to shatter a gold slime bag with his bare hands. A challenge Rick initially thought was impossible, until his master effortlessly demonstrated and destroyed it in an instant. With the strict discipline of training 50,000 punches a day, Rick stepped up to face the challenge, noticing the green slime punching bag, the weakest type. The other colors like blue, yellow, red, silver, and gold represented progressively stronger levels of slime. A young noble, the second son of the Dermoda family, wanted to show off his strength and prove his status. He chanted a spell, creating a small fireball, and threw it at the slime bag. The crowd immediately gasped in awe at the display of magic, but Rick found the performance unimpressive for someone praised as a genius. How weak. Now, it was Rick's turn to face the slime bag. As he approached, the crowd began to whisper, murmuring about his age, an older man taking the E-rank promotion exam. The examiner, curious about Rick's background, flipped through his file and remarked that adventurers usually train in magic until they're about 20, after which significant progress is rare. Observing Rick's below-average magic level, the examiner bluntly advised him to consider another career if he failed the exam. Rick felt the weight of everyone's stares, recognizing the pity in their eyes. But he remained resolute. Stepping forward, he took off his jacket and unleashed a punch at the slime bag with terrifying force, obliterating it and even piercing through the wall behind it. The crowd was stunned, shocked by his unexpected power, completely caught off guard by the level of destruction Rick's punch had caused. Rick realized he might have held back too little when he punched the slime bag. In the written portion of the exam, Rick scored a perfect 100, making the young genius jealous, secretly resentful that an ordinary man over 40 like Rick had become an obstacle in his path, and not for the first time. However, he remained confident about the upcoming defensive strength test. Contrary to expectations, the genius was stunned when he saw Rick block a level 4 spell, an achievement he himself had not yet reached. The examiner, impressed by Rick's ability, decided to increase the difficulty to a level 5 spell, and advised Rick to use a higher-level defensive spell to counter it. However, Rick confessed that he could only use level 1 magic for both offense and defense. Astonished by Rick's precise magical control, the examiner had no choice but to cast the level 5 spell. Amazingly, Rick blocked the attack flawlessly. Rick's performance caught the attention of a first-class knight. Upon arriving at the scene and hearing the examiner's account, the knight was shocked. An F-rank adventurer had destroyed a mid-tier slime bag made of blue and yellow slimes, and then blocked a level 5 spell from a second-rank mage using only a level 1 spell. The knight was deeply impressed. Even he, a first-class knight, couldn't do such a thing. The knight reviewed Rick's file and was surprised to learn that Rick, at 32 years old, had been working as a receptionist for 14 years. As Rick was resting on a bench with Lynette, the young genius appeared, his eyes welling up with tears, accusing Rick of overshadowing his moment in the exam. His older sister, Angelica, the eldest daughter of the Diramuto family, faced Rick. He immediately corrected his age, insisting he was around 30, not 40. Angelica threw her glove to the ground, challenging Rick to a duel. Unfamiliar with noble customs, Rick naively picked up the glove, joking that she needed to learn more about laundry. Lynette explained that by picking up the glove, Rick had unknowingly accepted the duel. Angelica quickly set the terms. The loser would have to serve the winner for life. As Rick pondered Angelica's strength, Lynette further explained, although Angelica is a second-rank knight, there's a legendary rank above even the first, the special rank, achieved by only 13 people. A second-rank knight is equivalent to a B-rank adventurer. Lynette reassured Rick about his chances of winning. But Rick had a feeling that Angelica was a formidable opponent. Preparing himself for the duel, he told himself he had to go all out against a second-rank knight. Angelica declared she would go easy on him, since Rick was only an F-rank adventurer. She cast an enhancement spell to increase her physical strength, and immediately began to radiate an aura. Without warning, Angelica lunged forward with incredible speed, swinging her sword so powerfully it sliced through the wall behind Rick like butter, leaving him stunned by her strength. As Rick faced Angelica, her younger brother spoke up, calling her Lightning Angelica, alluding to his sister's famous speed. Angelica warned that her initial miss was intentional and guaranteed she wouldn't miss a second time. As she prepared for her next flash step, Rick noticed that her speed was even slower than his own normal running pace, making him silently question her reputation. With an easy leap, Rick dodged Angelica's neck slash, leaving her in astonishment. Angelica couldn't comprehend how a man she thought was over 40 could have such fast reflexes, something she believed only a handful of first-rank knights could manage. Convinced that the miss was just a fluke, she attempted another flash step. But, unfortunately, her foot accidentally slipped on a small stone, causing her to lose her balance and spin uncontrollably. Rick, slightly surprised, wondered if he could even dodge such erratic attacks. However, he dodged every single blow, humbly thinking it was just beginner's luck and that his strength was only worthy of an F rank, nothing more. He recognized the potential danger in Angelica's strikes and praised her skill. Meanwhile, Angelica breathed a silent sigh of relief that Rick hadn't noticed her slip. Determined, she declared she would use an even faster flash step. Rick noticed her speed had tripled, but remained cautious, suspecting it might be a trap. While Rick dodged the attack yet again, Angelica grew more and more frustrated that an F-ranker could evade her Rin flash step, a move she could only use 2 more times. She hesitated, but then steeled herself for another attack, which Rick dodged again, leaving Angelica with no other choice other than unleashing her final move. Angelica hesitated, gathering her courage for one last attack with her Rhine blink step. But Rick had already anticipated it and was ready to counter. However, fate intervened as Angelica slipped on that same old stone again, turning her attack into an unintentional low lunge. Reacting quickly, Rick chose to punch the ground, using the force to push Angelica back, helping her avoid a direct hit. Silently, Angelica thanked the stone for the slip that saved her. Rick, on the other hand, was impressed by her evasion, mistaking it for a deliberate dodge. Intrigued by this F-rank adventurer, Angelica grew curious about Rick's past. He simply explained that he used to be a guild receptionist and had only become an F-rank adventurer 2 years ago. Angelica was a bit skeptical, but Rick assured her he was trying his best and expressed his gratitude for having a worthy opponent. In the end, Angelica accepted her defeat, acknowledging Rick's skill. Rick was stunned by Angelica's sudden surrender. He had thought she was the one with the upper hand. As she tried to walk away, Rick called out to her, reminding her of their agreement and encouraging her to honor the promise of their duel. However, this only made Angelica flee even faster. Meanwhile, in the examination hall, Rick was worried about his first test. Lynette gently reassured him, joking that even if he failed, he'd just have to triple his training intensity. Rick, with a wry remark, said that triple the training would probably kill him. Their conversation was interrupted by Hailing, the eldest son of the Diramuto family, who approached Lynette with flirtatious intentions, using a pickup line he'd casually learned from YouTube. After his opening line, he took Lynette's hand and boldly asked her to become his second wife. Rick immediately stepped in, playing the role of protector, pretending Lynette was his girlfriend to fend off Hailing's advances. Rejected, Hailing sneered at Rick, calling him a mediocre middle-aged man, and mocking his F-rank status. Arrogantly, Hailing boasted that he was an A-rank adventurer who had started his career at the age of 14 and would be supervising the mock battles of the second test. With a condescending attitude, he advised Lynette to dump Rick and choose him without a second thought. Lynette stood by Rick, asserting to Hailing that they were indeed in a relationship. She then criticized Hailing for overusing cologne, making his scent overpowering. Hailing, with a smug look, declared that he would be supervising Rick's test in the second round, determined to show Lynette the vast difference in their social status. The tension was temporarily eased when the examiners announced the test results, and Rick, relieved to see his number on the list, gently touched Lynette's shoulder to share his joy. He then quickly apologized for the fake girlfriend act earlier, worried she might have found it uncomfortable. To Rick's surprise, Lynette confessed that she was actually happy about the fake girlfriend act, after which she excused herself to go share the good news of Rick's success with his friends. Meanwhile, at a restaurant, Hailing sat fuming, suddenly kicking a nearby chair, determined to find a way to humiliate Rick. His anger intensified when his 2 younger brothers arrived, complaining that Rick had bullied them. Realizing Rick was the one who had caused trouble for both his younger brother and sister, Hailing began to plot a way to sabotage Rick's exam. Meanwhile, Rick entered the exam hall to begin the second part of the test, where a middle-aged man approached him. He introduced himself as Lynx Lolot, the proctor for this portion of the exam. Rick felt a sense of relief, silently thankful that Hailing wasn't his proctor. Lynx mentioned that he had looked over Rick's file and taken note of his age. Rick braced himself for condescending remarks based on his past experiences, but was surprised when Lynx expressed admiration for his determination. As a middle-aged man himself, Lynx encouraged Rick to pursue his dreams. He shared his own aspiration of becoming an A-rank adventurer, even though he'd been one for 20 years and was still B-rank at the age of 40. But he had never given up hope. This confession created a moment of mutual encouragement between the two men, ending with a sincere and determined handshake. After they parted ways, Hailing, who had been watching from a distance, silently followed Lynx to the staircase, intending to discuss something important. Rick glanced at the notice board and saw his number was in the group assigned to Lynx Lolot as the proctor, which initially made him very pleased. However, an announcement shortly after revealed that Lynx Lolot could no longer serve as the proctor, and Hailing was appointed to take his place, leaving Rick shocked and anxious. Hearing others talk about Hailing as the worst possible proctor, Rick grew curious and asked for more details, and learned that Hailing was a famous A-rank mage who had reached that rank at the age of 17, and was known by the nickname the F-rank Crusher for his harsh treatment of low-level adventurers during the exams. Rick knew that every year those taking the E-rank promotion exam under Hailing's supervision had to endure an incredibly grueling ordeal. Realizing he was now in Hailing's sights, Rick grew even more fearful, especially when he saw another contestant leaving the simulated combat area, with numerous injuries and in need of medical attention. During the matches, Hailing held nothing back, using high-level magic against the F-rank adventurers, which displeased the audience and drew criticism for his abuse of power against less experienced opponents. Hailing eagerly awaited Rick's turn, hoping to completely crush him. Suddenly, Hailing's butler approached him and asked to deal with Rick before it was his turn, and Hailing agreed. Rick, growing more and more anxious, considered his options. Lynette tried to calm him down, confident in Rick's true strength, but he was too distraught to listen. Suddenly, a suspicious-looking man claiming to be a fortune teller offered Rick a free reading. Although suspicious, Rick was also curious about the offer and agreed. As Rick sat down, Lynette noticed a magic circle appear on the chair, but she couldn't warn him in time. Rick vanished instantly, revealing that the fortune teller was actually Angelica's younger brother, who was gloating over his successful trap. However, Lynette's demeanor quickly changed, revealing her fierce side, as she interrogated the boy about where Rick had been teleported. Terrified, the younger brother confessed that Rick was within a 100-meter radius of the area. Outside the exam venue, Rick calmly decided to return to the hall, but was surrounded by a group of adventurers summoned by Haling's butler. The butler revealed that they were elite guards of the Diramuto family with the intention of eliminating Rick. Realizing Angelica's brother's role in this scheme, Rick understood the gravity of his situation. Facing at least 20 opponents, including B-rank adventurers and even an A-rank like the butler, he was completely outmatched in both numbers and strength. Rick prepared for the worst. Just then, fortunately, Rick's master appeared. Rick's master noticed Rick outside the exam venue and wondered why he wasn't inside when the exam was about to start. Rick, trying to be evasive, said he just came out for some fresh air. However, his master, a man with the appearance of an orc, sensed that something was off with the men surrounding Rick. Rick lightly tapped one of them on the shoulder, joking that they were just friends. But his master, with his sharp instincts, still felt something was unusual. Rick, feeling the situation growing tense, warned the butler that they should retreat if they wanted to live. Ignoring the warning, one of them swung his sword to attack Rick's master, the orc, who was surprised by the enhancement magic the attacker used, while pointing out that the sword needed more enhancement as it shattered on impact. As the confrontation continued, the man tried to throw a punch, but his fist was easily blocked by the orc, and his fingers were broken as a lesson in power. Immediately, the orc used magic to heal his fingers, advising and suggesting that he should train more. The orc's display of strength and magical ability stunned everyone present. They quickly realized this was Blowstone Ashork, a rare creature known as a wise orc, who was not only qualified to be an adventurer but could also speak human language and use magic. The butler, recognizing Blowstone's identity, acknowledged they were facing a member of the Orichalcum Fist, an S-rank adventurer, and one of the strongest people on the continent. However, the butler's underlings, underestimating their opponent, foolishly thought they could overwhelm Blowstone with their numbers and decided to charge in. An elf-like person quickly realized that these men weren't Rick's friends, but had actually dragged him into trouble. Understanding that Rick always prioritized resolving things peacefully, but also seeing the urgency of the situation, the elf devised a plan using his latest invention, a custom HK-416 enhanced with magic stones, allowing its bullets to explode on impact. The elf began to open fire on the adventurers, making Rick anxious as this action seemed to contradict his peaceful principles. However, the elf reassured Rick that his bullets were non-lethal. The butler, recognizing the elf's identity, understood the gravity of the situation. The elf, half-dwarf, was renowned as the most powerful weaponsmith, known as Mizet Eldwarf. In the midst of the chaos, one of the men suddenly took a child hostage, ordering Rick's group to get on the ground. The little girl, confused and not understanding his intentions, asked why they were doing this. Rick, trying to de-escalate the situation, told the little girl they just wanted to play. The man angrily yelled at Rick to shut up, which infuriated the little girl. To everyone's astonishment, the girl suddenly unleashed a powerful level 7 spell without an incantation, knocking back the entire group of adventurers and interrupting Rick's attempt at a peaceful resolution. The butler, witnessing this incredible power, revealed the little girl's true identity. She was Alicette Dracul, a pure-blood vampire and an outstanding talent. Despite being only 10 years old, she had already earned the title Prodigy of Destruction, renowned as an extremely powerful mage. The incident left a deep impression on the butler, causing him to reconsider his life choices. Overwhelmed by the power of the S-rank adventurer party and longing for a more peaceful life, he decided to resign and pursue a life of tranquility. Meanwhile, Lynette was still holding her brother, Angelica, hostage, insisting she wouldn't release him until Rick returned safely. Her overconfident brother declared that Rick wouldn't survive the attack of 20 elite guards. However, contrary to his expectations, Rick appeared completely unharmed, leaving the brother stunned and furious at the outcome. Lynette threw her brother Angelica at the ceiling, saying, "Nice work, Rick!" Noticing the damaged wall, Rick asked about it, and Lynette just shrugged, saying she had adjusted a few things. Rick thought to himself that he had to be extremely careful not to anger Lynette, terrified of her formidable strength. While waiting for the mock battle portion of the exam, Rick sat on a bench, clearly nervous about the prospect of facing Hailing. Other examinees continued to emerge from the exam room with serious injuries, but despite his seemingly calm exterior, Lynette noticed Rick's leg was shaking uncontrollably. Rick confessed his fear, pointing out the huge gap between his skills and Hailing's. He only knew how to use level 1 magic for both offense and defense, a mere 2 skills, while Hailing possessed 1,000 skills. Lynette tried to reassure Rick, but he still struggled to find confidence. Kneeling before him, Lynette expressed her unwavering faith in Rick's abilities, encouraging him to believe in himself, just as she had believed in him since the day he decided to become an adventurer. Suddenly, Lynx appeared, heavily injured. A shocked Rick asked what had happened, and Lynx revealed that he was attacked by Hailing to ensure Hailing would be Rick's examiner. Lynx recounted how Hailing had belittled his dream of building a school in his hometown, calling him third-rate and a late bloomer, claiming Lynx would never reach A rank. Lynx advised Rick to withdraw from the exam, fearing that Hailing would treat Rick even worse. However, Rick was determined to face Hailing, resolved to take him down. Meanwhile, Lynette was looking for a spot to watch Rick's mock battle. When she ran into Arisa, the two quickly hit it off and decided to watch the match together, with Lynette inviting Arisa to join her party. Blowstone greeted them warmly, offering them seats next to Arisa. Mise, noticing Arisa's arrival, was particularly interested in her 2 big weapons, and suggested she sit next to him. Lynette, sensing Mise's intentions, suggested Arisa sit elsewhere to avoid any potential harassment. Arisa was surprised to learn about the members of Rick's party, and was especially shocked to find out that Blowstone was Rick's master. Blowstone explained that an adventurer's strength is based on 4 major pillars: physical strength, body control, magic control, and mana capacity. He noted that since Rick started his adventurer's journey at 30, his mana capacity was quite limited, so he focused on intensely training the other 3 pillars. Blowstone shared that he trained Rick to develop extraordinary physical strength, to the point where he could take down the most dangerous monsters with his bare hands, aiming to turn him into a one-punch man. Misette, on the other hand, was responsible for teaching Rick magic control for the past 2 years. Meanwhile, Lynette, contrary to what Arisa thought of her as just an ordinary maid, was incredibly strong and had trained Rick in body control. Blowstone proudly stated that Rick tackled his training relentlessly and has now reached the strength threshold of an S-rank adventurer. He added that if Rick learned to utilize his latent ability, he could surpass all of them, but Rick is still unaware he even possesses such a skill. Misette recalled a time during training when Rick destroyed a large boulder, but Blowstone dismissed it as a basic skill for an F-rank adventurer. Misette wondered if Rick, who still thought of himself as just an ordinary F-rank, could handle this mock battle exam. As the match began, Rick and Hailing exchanged taunts, and Hailing quickly unleashed a chantless level 3 fire magic attack at Rick. Rick, caught off guard by the chantless attack, braced himself as the spell hit him head-on. When the smoke cleared, everyone was astonished to see Rick standing there completely unharmed. Hailing, impressed by Rick's durability, ramped up the power, unleashing a level 4 spell. Yet again, Rick took the hit without taking a single step back. Hailing then bombarded Rick with various elemental magics, lightning, water, and earth, but Rick withstood every attack, seemingly unbreakable. Frustrated that his magic was having no effect, Hailing switched to physical attacks, combining Blink Step Rhine with Sturdy Fist Key, and rushing in to land a powerful punch on Rick. But Rick countered instantly, meeting Hailing's punch with his own, sending Hailing flying backward while Rick didn't even budge. After regaining his balance, Hailing realized there was something different about Rick. Rick realized that while Hailing possessed abundant mana, his other fundamental skills were inferior to his own. This discovery made Rick more confident about winning the mock battle. Hailing then unleashed a level 3 fire spell with all his might, but Rick easily stopped it with the palm of his hand. As Hailing used Blink Step, Rhine to close the distance, Rick calmly declared that Hailing's speed was too slow. In response, Hailing activated his Iron Body skill to block Rick's punch, managing to hold his ground and finally acknowledging Rick as an excellent E-rank adventurer. However, Hailing still refused to fully acknowledge Rick's strength, accusing him of just being lucky. Rick retorted, explaining that he had used body manipulation, a technique far beyond ordinary enhancement magic. His curiosity piqued. Hailing asked Rick what he had been doing for the past 2 years to gain such strength. Rick recounted his brutal training regimen. He wasn't allowed to leave a dragon's cave until he could defeat it. He had to swim in a monster's liquid trap until he suffocated, and was dropped into monster territory with a 1-ton weight, forced to run 100 kilometers. An astonished Arisa overheard and asked if Rick had died during the training. Blowstone explained that Rick had died many times, but he revived him each time. Still skeptical, Hailing demanded more proof of Rick's stories. Rick then shared his ultimate dream, to defeat the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Arisapaito. This revelation made Hailing's family burst out laughing, dismissing it as a childish fantasy, comparing it to the fairy tale legend of the hero Yamato, who had defeated Arisapaito. Hailing mocked Rick's dream as something only a child would imagine. Determined to end the match, Hailing unleashed a level 7 no-chance spell, binding Rick's legs tightly. But he didn't stop there. Hailing proceeded to summon a giant golem with a level 8 spell, declaring it to be his strongest magic. Despite facing a formidable challenge, Rick remained resolute, clenching his fists, ready to take on both Hailing and the golem. Hailing ridiculed Rick for relying on low-level magic, but Rick confidently replied that he had practiced his magic hundreds of millions of times over the past 2 years. Hearing this, Arsa was in disbelief, thinking it was impossible. However, Blowstone explained that thanks to a special space-time magic, it was entirely possible, and that Rick had achieved this feat on his own. Hailing, eager to finish the fight, ordered the golem to attack Rick. In response, Rick unleashed his most serious level 1 spell, Air Shot, and threw a powerful punch at the golem. To everyone's astonishment, Rick's punch completely obliterated the golem in a single blow, and the force of the impact even sent Hailing flying backward, knocking him unconscious. After the dramatic match, the crowd was incredibly impressed by Rick's strength and skill, praising him endlessly. Rick later regrouped with his master and teammates, who congratulated him on his outstanding performance. He felt a sense of satisfaction realizing his true strength, something he had underestimated all this time. Though grateful for the harsh training from Blowstone and Mizei, Rick joked that they were the ones who had warped his common sense. Hailing, trying to leave the hall in a daze, was stopped by his worried younger siblings. However, Hailing insisted on walking out on his own. Rick approached Hailing, commenting on the irony of an elite genius like him losing to a late bloomer like himself. Hailing's younger brother tried to retaliate, but Angelica held him back. Hailing listened as Rick shared his own harsh training experiences, and expressed his hope that Hailing would become an even stronger adventurer. In response, Hailing vowed that he would be the examiner for Rick's next promotion test, promising to win and telling Rick to be ready. After their exchange, Hailing and his family left. The exam results were announced, confirming that Rick had successfully been promoted to E rank. This achievement made Rick recall his childhood 22 years ago, when he was just a boy. Rick was engrossed in the book, The Legend of the Hero Yamato, which told of the defeat of the ultimate demon Kaiser Urusepitoi to obtain the Akashic Records, a treasure that could grant any wish. Inspired by this story, Rick dreamed of becoming the hero who would conquer that challenge. However, when he shared his ambition, he was met with concern from his parents, who advised him to stay away from the life of an adventurer and pursue a more stable, respectable career. At school, the teacher conducted a test to see if any students possessed an innate skill, a special personal ability that could help a student earn a scholarship to a knight or mage academy. Surprisingly, even to himself, Rick discovered he had an innate skill, though its nature and power remained a mystery. This discovery brought Rick immense joy as he began to imagine a future where he could become a hero, just like Yamato from his favorite book. Filled with excitement, Rick eagerly shared the news of his innate skill with his parents. Rick was determined to pursue a career as an adventurer. However, despite his initial excitement, Rick found himself unable to access or use his mysterious skill. As the days went by, Rick's inability to tap into his innate skill left him increasingly disillusioned, and he gradually began to ignore it. Time passed, and Rick grew into a young man, eventually taking a job as a receptionist at the Adventurers Guild. 14 years later, he was still there, his eyes weary from the monotonous routine. One day, his close friend Isekai'd, now a B-rank adventurer, stopped by to pick up a new quest and invited Rick out for a drink that evening. On his way home, Rick reflected on Isekai'd's success and his own stagnant life, wondering how different things might have been if he had chosen the path of an adventurer 14 years ago. Suddenly, his train of thought was shattered by panicked screams. A monster had appeared. Rick rushed toward the commotion and came face to face with a massive demon. Noticing a maid nearby, he immediately dashed forward to protect her. However, to his astonishment, the maid effortlessly sliced the demon apart with her bare hands. As it turned out, the girl was Lynette. She thanked Rick for his bravery but assured him that she was a powerful adventurer, fully capable of handling such threats. Rick, in turn, expressed his gratitude for saving his life, and curious since he had never seen adventurers in combat, asked about her rank. He guessed she might be a B-rank adventurer. However, Lynette pulled out her guild card revealing that she was, in fact, an S-rank adventurer, leaving Rick completely astonished by her prestigious status. Impressed by Lynette's rank, Rick confided in her about his aspiration to become an adventurer at the age of 30, asking if it was even possible. Lynette acknowledged Rick's bravery in trying to protect her, stressing that courage is a vital quality for an adventurer. Hearing this, Rick felt a glimmer of hope, but Lynette quickly tempered his enthusiasm with a dose of reality. She explained that while courage is crucial, the ability to increase one's magical capacity generally stops after the age of 20. Lynette bluntly advised that with this limitation, his ambition to start an adventurer career at his age was practically impossible. Heartbroken, Rick accepted the harsh reality. Strangely relieved to have a clear answer, he even jokingly asked Lynette to hang out sometime. Surprisingly, she agreed, setting a time to meet him at 7 p.m. the next day. The next day, Rick worked in high spirits, which both amused and slightly annoyed Arisa due to his over-the-top enthusiasm. Saitd also stopped by the guild to pick up a B-rank quest, and couldn't help but find Rick's unusually optimistic demeanor a bit strange. After work, Rick rushed to their meeting spot, eager for his evening with Lynette. However, his plans were abruptly interrupted by the appearance of monsters. The townspeople estimated there were about 30 monsters, and urged Rick to run for his life. Despite their warnings, Rick, worried for Lynette's safety, immediately ran toward the chaos. When he arrived, he found that Lynette had already defeated the entire horde with ease. Breathing a sigh of relief that she was safe, Rick realized he never needed to worry about her, given her formidable power. But as the two were talking, another group of monsters suddenly appeared. Lynette confidently assured Rick that she could handle them on her own and told him to get to safety. However, as the situation grew more tense, Lynette suddenly felt unwell and collapsed, unable to continue fighting. Just as a monster was about to attack, Saitd suddenly appeared just in time, saving Rick from the blow. The other adventurers quickly joined in, combining their strength to deal with the horde of monsters. Saitd reassured Rick that they were more than capable of handling the situation. As he watched the adventurers fight, Rick felt the burning desire to become an adventurer ignite within him again, admiring their courage and strength in the face of danger. However, Lynette, still weak, warned Rick that they needed to urge the adventurers to retreat immediately. Rick was confused because the three adventurers seemed perfectly capable of dealing with the monsters. Lynette explained that she wasn't worried about the monsters they were fighting, but about the presence of a dragon nearby. Due to a psychological trauma from her past, Lynette couldn't control her magic when influenced by a dragon's magic. After Saitd and the other adventurers finished off the monsters, Rick tried to warn them about the dragon, but it was too late. The dragon had arrived, and Saitd realized that without at least 5 A-rank adventurers, their only option was to flee. They tried to retreat, but their path was blocked by an invisible magic barrier, trapping them with the dragon. Saitd tried to break the barrier, but every attempt was useless. The barrier held strong. In a bold and unexpected move, Rick stepped forward to face the dragon alone. Ready to fight despite the overwhelming odds, faced with almost certain death, Rick decided to confront the dragon with the spirit of a true adventurer. Standing before the mighty beast, a whirlwind of thoughts raced through his mind. Rick knew that his chances of defeating the dragon alone were nearly zero. Even a single light blow from it could be fatal. Despite his fear and doubt, he still heard a resolute voice inside him, urging him not to give up. Rick's indomitable spirit rekindled the courage in Saitd, prompting him to join the fight. However, the dragon, indifferent to their bravery, unleashed a terrifying blast of power that sent the entire group of adventurers flying, leaving them scattered and wounded all over the place. As they prepared to face the worst, the dragon prepared to launch another devastating attack. But unexpectedly, Rick, driven by an unyielding will, got back on his feet and faced the dragon head-on. In that very moment, he suddenly activated a special skill, Reckless Soul, and advanced toward the dragon without hesitation. The dragon responded with a powerful stomp, aiming its giant claw straight for Rick. Saitd and Lynette, unfamiliar with the concept of plot armor, watched Rick in horror, fearing for his life. Standing firm against the immense pressure, Rick not only blocked the dragon's pounce, but also pushed it back, creating a truly inspiring moment. A powerful Super Saiyan-like aura suddenly enveloped his body, leaving both Saitd and Lynette stunned, especially since Rick was known to have very little magical energy. Embracing his newly awakened power, Rick acknowledged that this skill had arrived a bit late, but he was ready to make full use of it. He unleashed a serious punch aimed at the dragon. just as it fired a massive blast of power toward him. Miraculously, Rick's punch broke through the dragon's scales, showcasing his extraordinary strength. Lynette and Zaid were stunned by Rick's power. Dazed and exhausted, Rick collapsed, satisfied with his accomplishment. A week later, Rick woke up in bed with Lynette by his side. She explained that his body was recovering because the magic circuits inside him had been damaged. Lynette then invited Rick to join her party, Orichalcum Fist. She admired his courage and determination in battle, and believed Rick had the potential to become a powerful adventurer. She also shared that the party's goal was to defeat Araucapieto, which perfectly aligned with Rick's dream. Overwhelmed with joy and moved by the invitation, Rick shed tears of happiness, excited for the chance to finally become a real adventurer. Back in the present, Lynette congratulated Rick on becoming an official adventurer. Rick, grateful, thanked Lynette and his master for their training and support. He was overjoyed that he had never given up on his dream. The day after the exam, Rick visited Lynx in the hospital to celebrate his discharge and make good on his promise to go for a drink. Curious about Rick's special power, Lynx expressed a desire to undergo the same training and was eager to meet Rick's party, which brought a complicated look to Rick's face. A few days later, Lynx prepared to visit Rick's party, following Rick's advice to wear his highest level equipment. Upon arrival, Lynx was stunned by the sight of a magnificent castle, reminiscent of a demon lord's abode, where Rick greeted him at the entrance. Lynx commented on the lack of monsters around the castle. Rick explained that no monster dared to come near, leaving Lynx confused by the advice to wear high-level gear. Inside the castle, Lynette warmly welcomed Lynx. Suddenly, Arisa descended from the stairs and fired a high-level lightning bolt at Rick, which he skillfully blocked. He gently reminded her not to use magic inside the castle, and only when Lynette threatened to take away Arisa's meal did she stop with a mischievous smile. While Rick was busy with Arisa, Lynx decided to explore the castle, carefully keeping his armor on as Rick had told him to when going outside. In an open area, Lynx came across Mizet, who was engrossed in crafting a new weapon, a bazooka. Mizet invited Lynx to test the invention by firing it at a target. The weapon launched a missile that exploded impressively, but Mizet seemed dissatisfied because there was still ash left, indicating there was more room for improvement. Lynx, however, was incredibly impressed by the weapon's destructive power, realizing that if this technology were mass-produced, it could completely change the very nature of warfare. Quickly, Lynx realized Rick's group was anything but ordinary and wondered if these extraordinary events were just another day for them. Continuing his exploration, he entered a room where he found Blowstone engrossed in a book. Blowstone welcomed Lynx and shared that reading helped him stay calm. Curious about Rick's training, Lynx expressed his interest, and Blowstone, sensing Lynx's enthusiasm, invited him to experience it firsthand. The group ventured deep into the forest, where Lynette was gathering mushrooms. Suddenly, Lynette heard a scream and discovered Lynx tumbling down a steep mountain slope, and she quickly caught up to him and saved him from a fatal fall. Lynx, though terrified, was immensely grateful, and then noticed a massive dead wild boar on the ground. Lynette simply said she'd use it for dinner, leaving Lynx stunned by her strength. Lynx recounted his training ordeal, revealing he was tied to 500-kilogram weights and forced to run down a 70-degree slope, which nearly led to his death if not for Lynette's timely intervention. Lynette shared that Rick had undergone the same kind of training, but that he had died a few times, a fact Lynx could hardly believe. On the way back, Lynx was amazed at how effortlessly Lynette carried the 500-kilogram weights. Later, he met Rick and asked about the number of times he had died during training, a question Rick dodged by complimenting Lynette's cooking skills. After enjoying a delicious meal, Blowstone brought up the topic of the 6 gemstones, magical stones that, when gathered, would open the dungeon where the legendary Kaiser Araucapieto sleeps and unlock the door to the Spiral of Origin. Lynx, who was familiar with this legend, shared that there were recent rumors of a sudden increase in wyverns near a northern guild and a mysterious red pillar of light. This information suggested their next adventure would lead them to that mountain. At the northern guild, a young F-rank female adventurer named Ray Lucas, who was usually assigned to sweeping the floors, was desperate for a real mission. Just then, Rick's party appeared, wanting to take on a quest with a danger index of 82. However, the receptionist denied their request. The guildmaster explained that the quest required at least 4 people, with at least 2 being A rank or higher, while their party only had 3 members. Rick and his team realized they needed to find a temporary 4th member. Blowstone requested the guildmaster provide an assistant, and the guildmaster, overwhelmed by Blowstone's presence, quickly agreed. He called for Ray Lucas. knowing she was eager to join a mission and insisted she join Blowstone's party. Despite her initial apprehension, especially towards Blowstone, Ray was welcomed with a handshake. Upon reaching the mountain peak, Ray grew curious about Rick's rank and learned that he was only a newly minted E rank. At the summit, they encountered a wyvern. Before Rick could even suggest a strategy, Blowstone casually threw a single punch that sent the wyvern flying. Rick worried that the wyvern's comrades might come for backup, but Blowstone, finding the situation to be a hassle, told Rick to get Ray to safety. Rick gets Ray to safety. While they wait, they see wyverns being sent flying from where Blowstone and Arisa are fighting. Suddenly, a red wyvern charges toward Rick and Ray, determined to engage them. Rick confronts the red wyvern and takes it down with a single punch straight through its head, killing it instantly. Ray is stunned by Rick's power and asks if he's really an E rank, but Rick confirms his rank. After the fight, Blowstone and Arisa join them, revealing that they've completed their mission and found one of the 6 jewels. Back at the castle, the party members gather to examine the Crimson Petal Jewel. This jewel emits a magical energy that attracts monsters and can lead them to the other jewels. Mizet uses complex magic on the jewel, creating a dirt map that pinpoints the location of the next jewel. This jewel is in Hirakutopia, a country famous for its martial arts tournaments and grand arenas. 4 centuries ago, Hirakutopia was just a small desert nation, until its 4th king, Alexander Hirakutopia, built an arena. Alexander himself participated in the matches, fighting without weapons, and holding an undefeated record of over 10,000 fights. His strength attracted challengers and spectators from all over the continent, quickly turning Utopia into a major power. Alexander, who built the nation with his fists, was honored with the title of Fist King. When Rick's party arrives in Hirakutopia, they contemplate how to begin their search for the jewel. They soon notice a thug harassing a woman. Rick steps forward to intervene, but Blowstone acts first, though he's more interested in asking about the jewel than in protecting the woman. The thug, feeling provoked, challenges Blowstone to a back alley fight. After a short fight, he realizes he's made a huge mistake. Defeated, he agrees to answer Blowstone's questions. Rick brings out the Crimson Petal Jewel, and Blowstone asks him about a similar jewel that is yellow. At first, Rick doesn't expect much from the thug's answer, but they are surprised when he reveals his knowledge of the Fist King tournament, pointing them to the reigning champion of the last 3 years. They see a hulking, muscular beastman warrior, causing Lynette and Blowstone to realize that the current Fist King is a truly formidable opponent. The thug suddenly remembers and tells them that the championship belt, displayed prominently in the center, contains the yellow magic jewel they are looking for. At the Red Rings gym, the current Fist King, Kelvin, is training when his coach calls his name. Just then, Rick and Lynette enter the room, immediately catching Kelvin's attention, who senses their power and is curious about their reason for visiting. Rick was about to ask about the gem, but Blowstone, preferring a more direct approach, interrupted and demanded Kelvin hand over the championship belt that contained the gem, offering another gem in exchange. The coach, worried about the gym's reputation, told them to leave, but Kelvin, intrigued, told the coach to calm down and decided to hear them out. Kelvin, thanks to his keen sense of smell, realized Rick's group wasn't lying. However, he respectfully refused the request, explaining that the belt was a symbol of pride for the people of Hirakutopia. Instead, Kelvin suggested they win the belt by conquering the Fist King tournament. Accepting this challenge, Blowstone and his companions left the gym. Rick, still hesitant, was reassured by Blowstone that entering the tournament was the right move. The coach, uneasy about letting them go so easily, dismissed them as just slightly above average. But Kelvin, recognizing the group's extraordinary power, eagerly awaited the upcoming tournament. Believing the battles would become legendary, at the Fist King tournament qualifiers for the Western region, Rick prepared to participate, though he wasn't very confident in his own strength. He decided to fight alone in this bracket. Lynette offered to join him, but Rick expressed his desire to face this challenge on his own. He thanked her for her support. Meanwhile, Blowstone had chosen to compete alone in the Eastern League. Rick was worried that with his immense power, Blowstone might accidentally injure someone during a match. When Rick was called in for his evaluation, the examiner explained the nature of the test. He would participate in a simulated match against random opponents, who were fighters that had joined the tournament the previous year. The examiner also clarified that even if Rick didn't win, he could still pass if his power met the required standard. Stepping into the arena, Rick nervously awaited his opponent. When he heard his opponent's voice, he was surprised because it sounded familiar. When the opponent stepped out, it turned out to be Angelica, leading to an unexpected reunion between the two in this strange setting. As Rick and Angelica faced each other in the arena, both were curious about the other's presence here. However, the examiner, eager to get the match underway, urged them to begin and suggested they could talk later. The battle began with Angelica determined not to lose, especially because of her pride and the fact that Rick had defeated her brother, Hailing, a top A-rank adventurer. She quickly used her flash step technique, but unexpectedly, she stumbled. Regaining her composure, she blamed herself for being careless. But when she tried flash step again, she stumbled once more, making her suspect that this was no coincidence. How strange. I have no idea why the author likes replaying this angle. Rick then revealed his newly developed skill, the first of the 8 secret techniques, the retreating leg sweep. Angelica, recognizing the skill and power required to execute this move, acknowledged Rick's talent, even though she didn't want to accept defeat. Despite her determination to continue, Angelica's next attempts at the flash step all ended with her falling. Finally, she realized it was futile and decided to give up, choosing not to continue fighting Rick. After the match, Rick told Lynette about his success in the test, which officially qualified him to participate in the Fist King tournament as a fighter. Angelica, curious about their goal in the tournament, listened as Rick explained that his goal was to win the Fist King tournament. Angelica explained the arduous path ahead, detailing the structure of the leagues and the requirement to place in the top 7 of the first league to qualify for the main event. She explained that as a new fighter, Rick would start in the rank 5 league and needed to win at least 7 out of 10 matches in each league to advance. This meant over 40 matches to reach the rank 1 league, a feat she considered nearly impossible within a month. However, Rick was unfazed by the challenge, recalling his harsh training and considering 40 matches in a month to be feasible. He suggested adjusting his plan with Lynette to accommodate this new challenge. Angelica, impressed and somewhat intimidated by their strength, could only advise them to leave the human realm quickly after witnessing the group's capabilities. Angelica informed Rick that tournament regulations only allow a fighter to compete at the same arena once per day, with dozens of preliminary arenas scattered within a 30-kilometer radius. She stressed that even with Rick's strength, it was impossible to fight any more matches for the day. Lynette, after reviewing the schedule, urged Rick to leave immediately, reminding him of the limited time. Rick looked at the notes and realized he had only 15 minutes to get to the arena 30 kilometers away. Angelica doubted this was possible, even by carriage. But Rick decided to run, hoping it would be faster. Angelica, with a look of disbelief, watched Rick dash off at an incredible speed. When she curiously asked if Lynette was going to watch Rick's match, Angelica was surprised when Lynette offered to take her to the arena. Lynette lifted Angelica up and leaped across buildings to quickly reach the arena. Rick had won his second match, feeling optimistic about his progress. He believed he could reach the rank 1 league in another 4 days if he kept up his current pace, an idea Angelica found hard to believe due to the intensity of fighting 10 matches a day. However, exceeding all expectations, Rick reached rank 1 in just 3 days. Rick proudly shared this good news with Angelica, not forgetting to thank her for providing valuable information on how the leagues worked. At a restaurant, Rick and Angelica discussed the hot news surrounding Blowstone's performance in the tournament. In one of his matches, Blowstone faced an opponent who had boasted that anyone hit by his punch couldn't stand up for 10 days. However, when this opponent punched Blowstone, it felt like hitting a giant tree trunk, completely ineffective. With just a single blow, Blowstone easily won the match. He completed all 40 matches, winning each with a single strike, and reached the rank 1 league in just 2.5 days. Seeing Blowstone's incredible success, Rick felt more admiration and excitement than ever. In light of Blowstone's remarkable achievement, Rick considered returning home, confident that Blowstone could handle the rest of the tournament on his own. However, Angelica provided Rick with the match schedule, explaining that in the rank 1 league, all opponents were prearranged. She emphasized that the matches at this rank were not just fights, but also part of an entertainment program with strict management from the organizers. The top 7 fighters of this league will advance to the main event. Angelica also explained the scoring system. Each win is worth 2 points, a win by decision is worth 1 point, a loss by decision gets 0 points, and a complete loss results in a deduction of 1 point. Each fighter would have 1 match against 10 selected opponents, and the rankings would be determined by their accumulated points. In his next match, Rick faced an opponent who used the tenacious fist technique. However, Rick skillfully dodged the blow and used the third move of the force retention secret art, a chop to the back of the neck, knocking his opponent unconscious. Rick, known in the gladiator circles as the Old Rookie, was victorious. In the next match, Angelica, nicknamed the Flash and the 9th-ranked gladiator, faced off against the 6th-ranked fighter, Taylor Blizz, the dangerous deep-sea creature. Angelica opened with her signature move, Flash Step, but Taylor remained calm, creating a level 3 water wall for defense. Angelica immediately countered with a level 2 lightning arrow, stunning Taylor. Lynette and Rick watched from the sidelines, impressed by Angelica's tactics and her solid foundation in all 4 combat disciplines. Rick admitted she was even stronger than his brother, Hailing. However, despite her skills, Angelica was still at a disadvantage against Taylor, who treated her attacks as minor annoyances and claimed he could withstand thousands of such blows. Taylor then unleashed a powerful punch at Angelica, who couldn't dodge in time, and was sent flying into a wall, knocked out instantly. Taylor Blizz won the match. After Angelica recovered in the medical room, Rick, worried about her, questioned her haste in the last match. He remarked that the fight wasn't in her favor due to her opponent's strong defense, and wondered why she'd exhausted all her energy like that. Angelica, slightly annoyed, brushed off Rick's concern and tried to leave. But Rick followed, suggesting she could have won with better planning. This made Angelica pause and consider discussing it further with Rick. However, their conversation was interrupted by noise from a nearby restaurant. Curious, they approached and saw Taylor, the gladiator from the previous match, in trouble. An aggressive Dragonborn was confronting a waitress, and Taylor was trying to protect her. But unfortunately, Taylor was defeated instantly, knocked down by the Dragonborn, and stepped on. Both Rick and Angelica were stunned to see Taylor taken down so easily. Angelica explained that the attacker was a Dragonborn, a race typically larger than humans. This Dragonborn was even bigger than Blowstone. The situation escalated when the Dragonborn, angered over a small spilled drink, tore the waitress's dress. As Angelica stepped forward to intervene, the Dragonborn turned his anger towards her. Rick quickly intervened, blocking the punch from Gis, the Dragonborn, just in time. Rick tried to de-escalate the situation, but Gis threatened to kill him. Just then, another Dragonborn, dressed in fine clothes, appeared. This person calmly advised Gis not to act rashly before the main tournament. Recognizing the newcomer as Snape, Gis reluctantly left the restaurant. Snape apologized to the restaurant staff for the disturbance and offered to pay for the damages. Then Snape turned to Rick, greeting him in a friendly manner. Snape introduced himself as Snape Lazarect, the head manager of the Western tournament. Rick was surprised that Snape knew who he was, but Snape explained that Rick's rapid rise to the top-tier league had made him a noteworthy figure in the tournament's history. Rick immediately realized Snape was a former gladiator. The feeling became even clearer when he shook Snape's hand and knew he'd had combat training. Snape admitted this, but said it was from 20 years ago. Snape revealed that, as a Dragonkin, his physique made it easy for him to attract attention and fame. Snape also explained that Gis Lazarect was his younger brother, and apologized for Gis's behavior, describing him as someone who easily loses his temper with those he deems weaker, and is hard to control due to his power. Snape expressed his helplessness in managing his brother's conduct. After apologizing once more, and asking about Angelica's condition, Snape left, leaving Rick curious about the connection between Angelica and Snape. Angelica then revealed that Snape was her fiancé, and also the reason she became a gladiator. Angelica admitted she'd been stuck at rank 9 for a while, and was eager to advance in this year's tournament, which explained her haste in the last match. Rick was surprised to learn about Angelica's engagement to a Dragonkin, a reaction that made Angelica laugh and tease him for being slow on the uptake. She further explained that the marriage was tied to her family's noble circumstances. Snape has the right to sponsor a fighter in the tournament, aiming to manipulate the results for profit by betting against the strong gladiators he sponsors and securing victories through fixed matches. Snape intended to amass a fortune, but Angelica suspected his goal wasn't just money, but also to strengthen his noble ties through marriage. To disrupt his plan, Angelica, determined to avoid marrying Snape and regain her freedom, believed the best strategy was to defeat Gis, the gladiator sponsored by Snape, before any fixed matches could take place. This determination drove her to continue in the tournament. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Rick offered to help Angelica with her training. In short, she wanted to fight for herself to escape her forced predicament. The next morning, Angelica eagerly prepared for the training session Rick had planned, despite his warnings about how brutal it would be. Angelica, confident and ready for the challenge, dove into the training Rick had prepared for her. They arrived at a vast field, where Rick initially suggested she run 20 kilometers, a seemingly possible task. However, Angelica was shocked when Rick fitted her with heavy weights of 30 kilograms for each arm and leg, adding to the difficulty. To make it even more challenging, Rick tied a rope to Angelica and started running at over 100 kilometers per hour, dragging her behind him. This speed far surpassed the capability of Angelica's blink step technique, pushing her to her physical limits and testing her endurance. Rick explained that the purpose of this training was to get Angelica's body used to fast movements. Noticing that while her initial burst of speed was strong, her subsequent movements were unstable. The goal was to improve her agility and control at high speeds. Rick shared that he had gone through a similar process, being dragged by Lynette to train his speed and stamina. After 6 exhausting hours, Angelica collapsed, begging for a break. However, Rick encouraged her to push past her limits, praising her stamina and comparing it to his own initial training experience, where he had faced death 3 times on the very first day. Angelica boasted that she had survived the first day without suffering the same extremes as Rick, but he just smiled and revealed they had only finished the morning session. When she realized there was still training after lunch, Angelica was stunned and insisted on a longer break. After 5 days of intense training, Angelica was sitting in a restaurant, ate her meal in a state of dejection. She said she was giving up, not because she was scared, but because it felt more like torture than preparation for the tournament. Angelica admitted that Rick's strength came from his ability to endure high-intensity training for 2 years. When Rick joined her at the restaurant, Angelica braced herself for a scolding from him. However, Rick had no intention of scolding Angelica. Instead, he wanted to share his own experiences from the past 2 years. He started off cheerfully, but Rick's expression gradually turned grim as he recounted the countless times he had died during his training. He specifically mentioned one incident, when he was killed by Aliset's magic, and Blowstone, having exhausted his mana, had to rely on Aliset to transfer mana to resurrect him. Hearing about Rick's grueling training regimen and repeated deaths left Angelica in shock. Rick reflected on his experience, wondering which was easier, enduring the present suffering or facing future regret. In the end, he chose to cherish his current hardships, agreeing with the wisdom of his predecessor that embracing such challenges was commendable. Angelica then opened up about her own background, expressing her dissatisfaction with traditional training methods. Angelica, despite being a noble lady, always felt a conflict with her true desires. Burdened by the expectations of the aristocracy, she yearned to become the strongest knight, preferring to endure present suffering rather than conform to societal norms. Determined to continue her training, Angelica asked Rick to meet her at their usual training spot after he finished his meal. To her surprise, Rick was already there waiting. Believing that Angelica needed to further intensify her training, he decided to bring Lynette into Angelica's training program, recognizing Lynette's expertise in transforming hand-to-hand combat skills into a refined swordsmanship technique. 20 days later, on the final day of the first-class tournament, Angelica entered her decisive match against Silva Helgund, the 7th-ranked fighter nicknamed the Raging Beast. A victory in this match would secure her a spot in the main tournament. After her intense training, Angelica entered the arena in her demon form. As the match began, she wasted no time, unleashing a powerful kick that sent Silva flying straight into a wall. This decisive blow not only showcased Angelica's superior fighting skills, but also confirmed her victory, allowing her to advance to the main tournament. As the 7th-ranked fighter in the West League, with a roster of 14 fighters ready, the day of the main tournament began, an atmosphere of excitement filling the entire arena. As the top 16 fighters gathered for the official competition, the air was thick with excitement as the contestants prepared to draw lots to determine their opponents. Angelica drew number 14, while Rick drew number 12, setting them on a path to potentially face each other in the semifinals. The reigning champion Kelvin Urvalf appeared to thunderous cheers and drew number 1. Much to Rick's relief, as it meant he could only meet Blowstone, who drew number 7, in the finals if they both made it through their matches. Jis, a sponsored fighter, drew a number, but it was secretly switched by the organizers to number 15, ensuring him a favorable opponent. Angelica, noticing Snape's manipulation, understanding that a plan was in motion with Gis playing a key role. The official tournament bracket was announced the next day, with the opening match between Kelvin Urvalf and Eddie Grace. Blowstone and the others were eager to witness Kelvin's power. As the match began, Eddie attempted a feint, but Kelvin didn't flinch, unleashing a powerful hook to Eddie's face, setting the tone for his overwhelming strength. Blowstone was impressed by Kelvin's ability to see through the feint, attributing it to Kelvin's unique nose, which allowed him to detect and accurately counter Eddie's move. Kelvin's decisive victory over Eddie further solidified his strength, leading Blowstone to anticipate a tough match in the semifinals against Kelvin, who seemed set to breeze through his initial opponents. Blowstone, Rick, and Angelica all won their first-round matches without any trouble, leaving the audience thrilled. In the next match, Gis Lizarekt faced off against Herma Muller. The fight began with Gis looking indifferent and sleepy, an attitude Herman tried to exploit with a JoJo-style punch. However, Gis's light tap, which Herman barely managed to dodge, created a shockwave. That stunned Herman, showcasing Gis's incredible power. Although Herman tried to press the attack, he couldn't land any significant damage on Gis. Angelica remarked that even as the second-ranked fighter in the West League, Herman was completely outmatched by Gis. Gis then slammed his fist into the ground, creating a smokescreen that disoriented Herman. Seizing the opportunity, he swung his arm and delivered a devastating blow, sending Herman flying out of the competition with just a single strike. After the match, Rick observed that while Gis possessed incredible strength and durability, his movements showed a lack of training, suggesting he had likely never trained seriously. As Angelica and Rick approached Gis, Angelica warned him to be more careful in their upcoming match, where she would be his opponent. Recognizing Angelica as his older brother Snape's fiancée, Gis nonchalantly said he would avoid hitting her in the face to keep her looking good for the wedding, even suggesting she should just forfeit to save him the effort. Furious at Gis's disrespectful attitude toward fighters, Angelica called him out for looking down on the serious training of others. Gis arrogantly claimed that his physique and natural talent were all innate, requiring no training like other people. Before leaving, he added a sarcastic remark that he would also avoid hitting her stomach so she could still bear children for Snape, which made Angelica seethe with rage, vowing to make him pay in their upcoming match. Angelica was determined to defeat Gis, declaring she would teach him a lesson he'd never forget. On the second day of the tournament, Rick's team, including Snape, had taken their seats to watch the anticipated match between Angelica and Gis. The match began with Angelica using Flash Step to land a kick on Gis, but it seemed to have no effect on him, despite her agility and attempts to use technique. To counter Gis's raw power, her attacks proved useless against his natural endurance. Angelica realized that she needed to use the new technique Lynette had trained her in, turning her bare hands into blades through the technique, known as Mana Inverse Reflection Flash Step. Angelica used the thread-cutting technique and left a cut on Gis, which surprised Snape, who was amazed by his younger brother's incredible durability. Enraged, Gis created a smokescreen and tried to ambush Angelica. Despite his efforts, she continued to evade him thanks to her enhanced speed. However, Gis proved his superiority by vanishing and reappearing right behind Angelica, landing a powerful punch that sent her crashing into a wall. Though heavily injured, Angelica refused to give up, driven by her determination not to lose to someone who scorns the value of hard work. As Gis prepared to deliver the final blow, aiming to end the match with a fatal strike, Rick called for the referee to intervene, fearing for Angelica's safety. However, the referee couldn't act in time, and just as Gis's fist was about to connect with Angelica, the blow mysteriously missed, hitting the wall instead of its target. The match ended with the victory being awarded to Gis, but he felt that his punch had been deflected by an external force. His suspicions fell on Rick, who showed a subtle anger, as if he had interfered with the final blow. Angelica was then taken to the infirmary, leaving Lynette to wonder about Rick's whereabouts. Mizé suggested that Rick had been provoked by someone, and pitied the person who had angered him. In the hallway, Rick ran into Giz, who was eagerly awaiting a match with him. However, Rick calmly refused and advised him to be patient, promising a decisive showdown in front of an audience the next day. Giz, in his frustration, punched a wall, eagerly awaiting the clash he had longed for. Rick's next opponent was the speed sorcerer, Michelangelo. Right from the start of the match, Michael unleashed a level 7 magic spell, but Rick quickly countered with his ground-crushing fist, took down Michael instantly, and won with just a single punch. After the match, Rick stopped by the infirmary to visit Angelica. The nurse assured him that Angelica's life wasn't in danger, but she would need time to recover. Rick sympathized with Angelica's frustration after all her hard training, and encouraged her to watch his match the next day to see the fruits of their labor. Blowstone and Kelvin also won their matches easily, setting up a thrilling semi-final, Kelvin versus Blowstone and Rick versus Giz. Rick spent the entire night preparing meticulously for his battle with Giz. On the third day of the tournament, as the semi-finals were about to begin, Angelica, now healed by Blowstone, reassured Rick about her condition. She expressed regret over her defeat, feeling like she was a failure. But Rick encouraged her, taking responsibility for underestimating Giss's strength, and told her to watch his upcoming match closely. Angelica joined Rick's group in the stands, while Snape placed his bet on his younger brother Giss, and the others rooted for Rick. When the match began, Giss provoked Rick, but he responded with a powerful slap that sent Giss staggering and coughing up blood. Rick made his contempt clear, urging Giss to get up and fight properly. Giss tried to counter with a punch, but Rick skillfully pushed up from underneath, causing Giss to lose his balance and fall to his knees. Angelica was surprised to see that Rick had managed to damage Giz. Miz had explained that Rick used a body control technique called an internal shockwave, focusing the impact internally rather than externally, which is effective even against a Dragonborn's tough body. Giz then activated his Dragon Force, drastically increasing his speed. Rick was taken aback by Giz's sudden speed, and though he managed to block a knee kick, the force still sent him flying backward. Giz continued his assault, trying to stab Rick with his claws, but Rick swiftly dodged. Despite trying to create distance, Giz quickly closed in and landed a kick to Rick's face. Rick charged at Giz, but he countered with his iron body, rendering Rick's attack ineffective. Model. Giz continues to use cutting thread, narrowly missing Rick and leaving a tear on his shirt. Giz then uses the very same technique, Rick's internal force strike, from behind, knocking Rick to the ground. Giz taunts Rick, calling him a useless commoner. Rick endures a few more blows but remains calm, while Giz begins to tire. Rick then reveals another technique, Fluid Body, which disperses the force of impact throughout his body, minimizing the damage from Giz's attacks. He also reveals that he had been holding back his power to match Angelica's physical level in order to prove her potential in the match. Blowstone comments that this fight is essentially an indirect battle between Angelica and Giz. Enraged, Giz prepares a final attack, combining Iron Body, Sturdy Fist, and Angelica's signature Blink Step rhyme. Rick counters with an internal force strike, criticizing Giz for recklessly mimicking others' techniques. The punch lands squarely in Giz's stomach, forcing him to his knees. Snape is impressed that Rick made Giz submit, wondering if Rick's potential might even surpass Giz's. However, Rick explains that he's just an ordinary middle-aged man, while Blowstone notes that Rick is past the age for mana training, with a mana pool even smaller than the average villagers. Angelica realizes that Rick's strength comes from persevering through 2 years of grueling training, a period far longer than her own training time. Rick mocks Giz for his lack of experience, his exhaustion, and his inability to maintain the precision of his techniques. He argues that hard work surpasses talent, and that is their true strength. In response to Giz's desperate punch, Rick unleashes another internal force strike, causing internal damage to Giz's arm. While acknowledging Giz's natural talent, Rick insists that without hard work, Giz is just a level 1 rookie. He stresses that talent must be trained and instinct must be honed. Angered by Rick's word, Giz transforms into a larger dragon form, activating dragon recursion, and throws a powerful punch that sends Rick flying into a wall. Rick quickly recovers, using Blink Step and landing an internal force strike on Giz, but the attack is ineffective against his metal-hard body. Giz's sudden tail whip stuns Rick, clearly demonstrating his opponent's advantage. Realizing he can't defeat Giz by relying on a power level equivalent to Angelica's, Rick decides to stop holding back and adjusts his power to reflect 6 months of intensive training. Giz is shocked to learn that Rick had been suppressing his power. Rick easily dodges all of Giz's attacks, adjusting his power to a level equivalent to 9 months of training, and continued to land internal energy strikes, visibly damaging Giz. Giz tried to counterattack, but couldn't keep up with Rick's speed. Rick vanished from sight again, dodging all of Giz's attempts, then boosted his power to a level equivalent to 12 months of intense training. Rick moved so fast that Giz couldn't even perceive him, while Angelica, witnessing this display, felt inspired, and believed that with a similar year of training, she could also achieve such power. Rick continuously used Flash Step, overwhelming Giz and pushing him to his physical limits. In a battle of talent versus effort, Giz charged forward recklessly, but Rick countered with his cutting thread technique, piercing through Giz's metallic body and knocking him unconscious. Rick was victorious in the semi-final match, commenting that Giz was lucky that he didn't have to face Angelica after she completed that hypothetical year of training. Rick and Angelica gave each other a thumbs up, celebrating their victory. Despite his younger brother's defeat and a significant financial loss, Snape remained calm, accepting the outcome of the match. Snape admitted he had lost a large sum of money, but a part of him also wanted to see Giz taken down a peg recognizing the difference between his own hard work and Giss's reliance on natural talent. Snape didn't regret this outcome and was also sad about missing the chance to marry Angelica, whom he praised as an outstanding woman. With a hint of regret, Snape bid Angelica farewell. Meanwhile, Blowstone prepared for his match against Kelvin, sending the stadium into an excited roar. Kelvin entered to thunderous applause, but the tense atmosphere suddenly escalated when Giss, still suffering the after effects of dragon recursion, suddenly charged at Kelvin. With remarkable composure, Kelvin took Giss down with a single punch, impressing the crowd and cementing his status as a formidable champion, on par with S-rank warriors. The match between Kelvin and Blowstone began, with Kelvin opening with a flurry of powerful JoJo-style punches aimed right at Blowstone. Blowstone was able to block every one of Kelvin's attacks, and with his agility, Kelvin quickly moved behind Blowstone to strike. But Blowstone still countered brilliantly, showcasing his superior strength and defense. Kelvin followed up with an acrobatic slashing kick, but Blowstone blocked it, and retaliated with a powerful uppercut. Although Kelvin avoided a direct hit, the shockwave from Blowstone's punch still caused massive damage to the arena. Realizing Blowstone's extraordinary power, Kelvin admitted this was the toughest opponent he had ever faced. Finally, a worthy adversary. His eyes lit up with determination for this legendary match. Kelvin initially thought Blowstone was just a fighter who relied on raw power, but he quickly realized the importance of the 5 core skills in battle and assessed Blowstone as a well-rounded opponent with high stats in every area. He noted that since the start of the match, Blowstone hadn't moved from his original spot, making Kelvin wonder if Blowstone was intentionally giving him an advantage. Realizing he had unintentionally created a handicap for his opponent, Blowstone apologizes and immediately faces Kelvin's rolling fang punch. Despite trying to block it, the special rotating punch forces Blowstone to dodge instead of defend, which greatly impresses Kelvin. Kelvin then combines his JoJo punch with regular punches and the rolling fang technique, forming a relentless chain of attacks aimed at Blowstone. However, Blowstone easily blocks Kelvin's normal punches and skillfully dodges the rolling fang technique. When Kelvin attempts a low kick, Blowstone absorbs the attack and counters with an uppercut. Kelvin barely manages to avoid the direct punch, but the shockwave from Blowstone's strike still hits him, causing a fracture in his rib from just a light graze. This reveals that, contrary to his well-rounded appearance, Blowstone's strength and defense are actually superior, making him a fighter who relies on overwhelming power. Blowstone then speaks to Kelvin telepathically, who immediately realizes Blowstone is holding back his power. Kelvin confesses that he finds it difficult to fight with all his might. After becoming stronger 7 years ago, in an abandoned slum, Kelvin's future coach and his associate were searching for potential fighters. Hearing rumors of the hungry wolf of the slums, they were curious to test his strength. Upon arriving at Kelvin's place, they discovered he had already defeated most of the thugs in the area. Impressed by Kelvin's strength, they confirmed he was the hungry wolf and stated their intentions. They owned a fighting gym in Isekai'd and wanted to recruit Kelvin for his potential. The coach offered Kelvin a chance to use his fists in Isekai'd, promising that he would be well-fed and could face stronger opponents. Enticed by this prospect, Kelvin was drawn to the invitation. And upon arriving in Isekai'd, he was astonished by the stark contrast between the vibrant city and the slum he used to live in. At the gym, he discovered the place was a gathering of top fighters from the King Fist tournament. Though eager to prove himself, Kelvin was quickly defeated by the 4 strongest fighters. The coach had anticipated this, believing that with time and training, Kelvin's talent and experience would see significant growth. Despite the initial failure, Kelvin was not discouraged. On the contrary, he was even more motivated to become stronger with each fight. Kelvin got to enjoy foods he had never tasted before, and dedicate himself completely to the harsh training. After just 1 year, he entered the King Fist tournament, advanced to the final round, and faced the 2-time defending champion. Kelvin's confidence never wavered, and the final match was surprisingly easy, marking his rise as the new champion. Everyone from the gym celebrated Kelvin's victory together at a restaurant, all of them congratulating him. However, Kelvin felt a lack of excitement. The matches had started to feel like just another daily chore. His opponents might as well have been standing still, unable to keep up with his attacks. The repetitive victories with no real challenge left Kelvin feeling empty, even though he'd only been training for a year. Kelvin knew he could become even stronger, but he also understood that constant training might rob him of the joy he found in fighting. Even so, he kept training diligently, relishing the feeling of growing stronger every day. and driven by the desire to meet the expectations of his coach, the man who had saved him from the slums. After once again winning the Fist King tournament with just a single blow, Kelvin no longer felt any joy in his victories. A year later, he overheard a conversation about how the tournament was losing its appeal due to his utter dominance, which threatened the gym's income. Despite suggestions to fix the matches, Kelvin's mentor adamantly refused, valuing Kelvin's reputation as the strongest champion more than the gym's financial gain. Kelvin understood that his mentor saw him as a son after his own biological son had suddenly passed away at the age of 19. This discovery made Kelvin even more determined not to cause his mentor any trouble, even if it meant holding back his power in matches to please the crowd. This approach helped the gym and the tournament regain their popularity, proving that Kelvin's decision to entertain the audience was his way of repaying his mentor. During his match with Blowstone, Kelvin confessed that he found it hard to fight seriously. Blowstone responded by using only 2 fingers. But even while holding back, Blowstone's power was still overwhelming, effortlessly blocking and countering Kelvin's JoJo attacks. Kelvin's coach, watching the fight, urged Kelvin not to underestimate Blowstone, on to fight with all his might. He stressed that his lifelong dream was to forge the strongest warrior in history, and he had placed all of that faith in Kelvin. The coach clarified that his son's legacy was a different story, meant only for Kelvin to hear, advising him to focus completely on becoming the strongest, as fulfilling his mentor's dream was the most worthy way to repay him. Inspired by those words, Kelvin prepared for battle. He vanished in an instant and lunged forward, throwing a punch at Blowstone, who responded by blocking the punch with 5 fingers instead of just 2. Blowstone retaliated with a punch of his own, but Kelvin swiftly dodged it and created some distance, then unleashed his level 5 magic, a fire wave aimed straight at Blowstone. Angelica was astonished to see that Kelvin, a dogman, a race known to be poor at magic, could cast a 5th-tier spell. Blowstone reacted instantly, stomping the ground to erect a defensive wall, infusing it with mana to block the flames. Rick observed Kelvin's natural talent and his persistent training, recognizing him as a true genius, on par with Blowstone. As Kelvin prepared another spell, Blowstone saw his chance and threw a punch into the molten wall, sending shards flying toward Kelvin. Kelvin dodged them with a flash step, and then cast a 7th-tier spell, #name. While Blowstone was bound, Kelvin began chanting an 8th-tier spell, summoning a meteor aimed straight at his opponent. However, Blowstone quickly broke free from his bonds, and with a powerful punch, he shattered the meteor, astonishing everyone, including Kelvin. Blowstone expressed respect for Kelvin's determination to fight with all he had, and pledged to respond with equal force. He gave a sideways thumbs up, a gesture Rick explained as a quarter thumb in the orc language, signifying a refusal to dodge or defend, a readiness to meet him head-on. Blowstone's approach showed that he was now on the offensive, making Kelvin feel wary for the first time. In response, Kelvin used a 6th-tier spell, Electric Burst, and Blowstone took the attack without dodging. Blowstone taunted Kelvin for holding back, urging him to unleash his full power, then charged forward and threw a powerful punch. Kelvin dodged, but the force of Blowstone's punch devastated the entire arena, causing massive destruction and perhaps sending a few spectators to the afterlife. Let's hope they bought insurance before watching this match. Kelvin realized he could no longer rely on his keen sense of smell to predict Blowstone's movements, and switched to continuously casting 4th to 6th tier spells. Yet Blowstone was unfazed, continuing to advance and ignoring the magical attacks. As Kelvin prepared to cast a 7th tier spell, Blowstone broke through his defenses, unleashing a powerful punch. That sent Kelvin flying. Although Kelvin tried to mitigate the damage using defensive techniques like flexible body, the force of the blow still left him reeling. Rick, witnessing Kelvin's resilience and quick defensive improvisation, couldn't help but be impressed. He remarked that Kelvin had shown considerable effort in minimizing the impact of Blowstone's powerful punch. However, Kelvin, now on the ground and coughing up blood, realized the severity of his injuries. Even so, with the determination to honor his coach's dream, Kelvin got back up and unleashed a barrage of chantless 7th tier spells, using up all his remaining mana. Without yielding, drawing on the last of his physical strength for a final assault, and spurred on by the cheers from the crowd, Kelvin gathered his power for one last blow. Kelvin combined his flash step, hardened fists, and various forms of magic into a technique he called Katai Rusengan, Coiling Fang. This precise strike landed squarely on Blowstone, who praised Kelvin's extraordinary effort, despite only being pushed back slightly. Realizing he had given it his all, Kelvin accepted his defeat, Blowstone responded, with a respectful punch, ending the match and affirming his victory. The crowd erupted in applause for Kelvin's valiant effort, praising the fighting spirit and admirable skill of both combatants. Blowstone won the match. 2 years ago, when Rick first arrived at the Orichalcum Steel Fist main base in Beak Castle, he met Blowstone, and the two shook hands. From that handshake alone, Blowstone immediately recognized Rick's lack of martial arts knowledge and inexperienced demeanor based on his muscle movements and weak energy flow. Blowstone pointed out Rick's shortcomings in the 4 fundamental aspects of an adventurer, specifically noting his low mana. Despite this, Blowstone also saw potential in Rick due to his ability to activate conditions. Though it was a difficult power to fully utilize, Blowstone didn't discourage Rick. Instead, he suggested that Rick would need to undergo significantly more training than someone with natural talent, and asked if Rick was willing to take on the challenge. Fast forward to the present as the final match between Rick and Blowstone approaches. Rick, having completed his quest for the gem, is considering forfeiting. He is surprised by Blowstone's excitement for their final battle. As he claps Rick on the shoulder, leaving Rick feeling immense pressure, Angelica seeks out Rick, finding him alone in his room. Although she and Snape try to encourage Rick to participate in the final match, Rick remains concerned for his safety against Blowstone. This disappoints Angelica, as she has always looked up to Rick as a mentor. Isekai'd later shares with Rick that Blowstone's comprehensive training plan seemed to have been designed from the start, apparently with the goal of creating an opponent capable of challenging a Rusapito warrior. Isekai'd reveals that the true goal behind the training was Blowstone's desire for an equal in combat, reflecting the Orshish desire for battle while also soothing the loneliness of his own overwhelming strength. Encouraged to consider things from Blowstone's perspective, Rick reconsiders his decision. On the day of the final match, both of them entered the arena to thunderous applause. Rick's presence brought joy to Snape and pride to those who had placed their hopes in him. To ensure safety, Isekai'd had erected an air wall surrounding the arena, protecting the audience, creating a grand stage for the final battle. As the battle began, Rick realized that throughout the tournament, he had been focused on restraining his power. However, facing Blowstone at his peak, he prioritized evasion to avoid severe consequences. To everyone's surprise, Rick's flash step demonstrated unprecedented speed, far surpassing the expectations of both Angelica and Kelvin. Rick unleashed an attack that not only cracked the ground, but also left a small scratch on Blowstone's arm. Although Rick moved with incredible agility and launched a barrage of unexpected punches, Blowstone still skillfully blocked every attack, leading to a high-speed exchange of offense and defense. Sensing a deadly punch coming from Blowstone, Rick instinctively created distance between them, choosing to stay out of harm's way. Rick countered with his cutting thread technique, inflicting another scratch on Blowstone, causing the crowd to erupt in excitement. Kelvin and Angelica struggled to follow the fighters' dizzyingly fast movements, amazed at the power they were witnessing. Though still afraid, Rick remained firm in his resolve to fight, while Blowstone decided to switch from defense to offense, preparing to launch a long-range shockwave punch. Anticipating this, Rick prepared to dodge. However, Blowstone didn't just throw one punch, but a continuous barrage of shockwaves, a technique Isekai'd described as Blowstone's normal punches, capable of continuous attacks, catching Rick off guard and closing the distance. Faced with this relentless assault, Rick worried he would have a hard time dodging the next blow. But as the dust settled, Rick was seen using a level 1 defensive skill to deflect Blowstone's punch, and what's more, without any incantation, leaving Kelvin thoroughly impressed. Blowstone praised Rick's skillful parry, while Angelica couldn't help but acknowledge the intensity of the match, likening it to a clash of S-rank fighters where they displayed abilities far beyond human limits. Blowstone, with the pride of a teacher, praised Rick for becoming stronger, and expressed that Rick had earned his respect. Rick was surprised by Blowstone's praise because he knew Blowstone wasn't one for lies or empty compliments. Rick felt honored but also realized it still wasn't enough. To fulfill Blowstone's dream, a fist fight with an equal, Rick shared what Isekai'd had told him about Blowstone's dream, and expressed his desire to repay that dedication. He asked Blowstone the reason behind his wish for a fair fistfight. Opening up, Blowstone began to tell his story from 46 years ago. Traditionally, orc tribes lived in gender-segregated communities, but from a young age, Blowstone realized he was different from his family and the other orcs. His distinct gray skin, and an intellect that far surpassed his peers. Blowstone taught himself to read and write from books left behind by humans, gradually adopting their lifestyle and habits, and gave himself the name Blowstone. He also studied martial arts, magical knowledge, and even healing arts. Because in orc tribes, disputes were often settled by combat, and the strongest became the leader. Blowstone's father, the clan chief, couldn't understand why he spent all day reading and eventually challenged him over it. When Blowstone defeated his father in the duel, he became the chief at just 10 years old. Using his accumulated knowledge, Blowstone improved the tribe's living conditions, building houses, cooking on fire, and teaching them non-violent communication. Gradually, the tribe began to see him more as a god than a leader, and no one dared to challenge him or even wanted to spar with him anymore. Even his own family respected him from a distance. Blowstone recalled the days when his family would settle arguments with their fists and then share a meal together. But now, as a god, he could only watch from afar, leading to a profound sense of loneliness. One day, after living in isolation for 10 years, Blowstone ventured out in a heavy storm to gather materials to build a barrier against landslides. When he returned, he discovered his entire tribe had been slaughtered. The shock wasn't that he couldn't save them, but because he realized he felt no sadness, only that his solitude had deepened. After that, Blowstone began to wander aimlessly until he stumbled upon a village being attacked by a monster. With a single punch, he easily defeated the monster. But the villagers, mistaking him for another monster, fled in fear. An adventurer tried to confront Blowstone, but upon realizing his extraordinary strength and understanding that Blowstone had just saved the village, the adventurer decided to approach and talk to him. Blowstone told his story, expressing his desire to find equals. That adventurer revealed he had fought alongside the hero Yamato in the 5 great legends 200 years ago, and shared his own unfulfilled dream of defeating Kaiser Arusapieto. Pieto Blowstone, who had heard the legends of Yamato, was stunned to learn these events were real. The adventurer gave Blowstone his blessing, hoping that he would achieve what they could not, and that strong allies would walk with him. From then on, Blowstone became an adventurer and founded the Orichalcum Iron Fists, gathering members like Mazette, Alicet, and Lynette. Despite their strength, could not fulfill Blowstone's desire for a fight between equals, a dream he had never spoken of. When he proposed a grueling training regimen, his members doubted anyone could endure it, causing Blowstone to gradually give up on that dream. Hearing Blowstone's story, Rick realized his own fears were baseless and felt grateful for the chance to pursue his own dream. Rick declared that they would both abandon defense and focus entirely on offense. Rick and Blowstone gave each other a thumbs up, then rushed into battle with powerful punches. Their punches created shockwaves so immense, they shattered the ground beneath them. The blows were so intense that the shockwaves from their battle began to crack the protective air wall around the arena. As they continued to fight, even as both began to cough up blood, they were determined not to stop, relentlessly continuing their assault. Eventually, the force of their battle shattered the protective barrier, and Mazette quickly urged Snape to evacuate the audience, and the crowd began to flee the arena. Kelvin, however, decided to stay, telling his gym members and coach to leave without him. Angelica was blown away by the force of the battle, but Snape managed to catch her in time and carried her to safety. Surprised that Snape hadn't left, she realized he wanted to witness the fight as a seasoned, former gladiator. After a long exchange of blows, both Blowstone and Rick were exhausted, but they persevered, throwing punch after punch. Just when it seemed Rick's stamina was about to hit its limit, Blowstone unleashed a powerful punch that sent Rick flying out of the arena. Kelvin, Angelica, and the others who witnessed this thought the match might be over. Rick, believing he had fought his hardest, considered heading back to rest. However, feeling he still hadn't given it his all, Rick clenched his fists, ready to activate his innate ability. The condition to activate this ability required him to resolve to push past his limits and face an opponent far stronger than himself. With his reckless spirit ignited, Rick erupted with a powerful aura, catching Blowstone by surprise. In response, Blowstone removed his prayer beads, implying he wouldn't need to use healing magic on Rick in this match. These beads enhance the effectiveness of healing magic, and they're also very heavy, so him removing them signals a moment of liberation, reminiscent of a similar scene in the manga when Rock Lee removes his leg weights in Naruto. Kelvin took a deep breath, preparing to witness the fully unleashed power of them both. Rick charged towards Blowstone, with a smile on his face, ready to unleash his most powerful attack, and Blowstone, with unwavering resolve, prepared to receive Rick's mighty blow. After enduring Rick's heavy blow, Blowstone countered with an uppercut to Rick's stomach, kicking off a fierce exchange of blows between them. Blowstone recalled his long-held dream of a fair fight, but realized that he was no longer alone, as he had comrades willing to go to the very end for him. Cherishing his companions, Blowstone took another powerful punch from Rick, with a smile on his face as the fight reached its climax. Both fighters had reached their limits, but still prepared for one final punch. The impact of the attack created a massive explosion, blanketing the arena in thick smoke. When the smoke cleared, both were still standing. But Rick, respecting Blowstone's endurance and determination, collapsed and accepted his defeat. The announcer officially declared Blowstone the winner of the 113th tournament. However, Blowstone, realizing the profound meaning of the fight and the fulfillment of his dream, considered Rick to be the true winner before he also collapsed from exhaustion. Their confrontation concluded in a sacred and profound moment, marking a meaningful end to their legendary rivalry. It was truly a beautiful moment, simple yet magnificent.